My name is Angelina Sarwin, and today I'm going to talk with Robyn Hannigan. Robyn is a professor at the University of Massachusetts in Boston and chair of Environmental Earth and Ocean Sciences there. Hi, Robyn.
Hi, Angie.
You've come quite a long way. You must be one of the fastest risers in science in America. I met you while you were a postdoc at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. That's been quite a while. And then you went on to ODU, right? And then to Arkansas. And would you like to elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. I mean, I none of those things are planned. I always tell my students that my career is very serendipitous, and I happened to meet people along the way who were very influential in the opportunities that were provided to me. So going from Rochester, where I got my PhD, then to Woods Hole, then to Old Dominion, and then got my first faculty position at Arkansas. Spent 7 years there, rose through the ranks of associate to full professor science foundation, became a program manager, and now I'm a department chair. So very, very fast, lots of changes. It seems like every 3 years I reinvent myself.
Do you also sometimes find it just as hard to describe what you are, what you do, as I sometimes do? What's the best label you think for yourself in scientific terms?
Probably it's very difficult because one of my colleagues actually called my CV yesterday schizophrenic. So when you look at the sort of work that I'm doing, I am all over the place. But the one thing that I am absolutely is a geochemist, and I firmly believe that if you're well trained in geochemistry and the chemistry of this planet, you can solve all kinds of problems.
Medical geology, how would you define that field? And are you the only one in that field? Are you the person who is opening that field up right now?
Oh, I would like to take credit for that, but I'm one of the few in the United States, but Europe is leagues ahead of us in terms of the linkages between the geologic environment and human health. So we're actually, the International Medical Geology Association is a European-based organization that has very strong connections also in Latin America. And there's probably about 6 or 7 of us in the United States that are starting to get much more active in that field. A lot of folks are familiar with things like mercury poisoning in Minamata Bay or arsenic in groundwater. Medical geology is more than just that. Medical geology is actually things like looking at lead poisoning, like lead concentrations that are very high in rocks, the black shales, for instance, and the communities that are exposed to those metals simply because they happen to be living in an area where there is a lot of black shale, for example.
The other day, I saw this TED Talk by Jane McGonigal, who did her PhD at Berkeley and now works at the Institute for the Future, and she's been designing games for about 10 years. I happen to know that you used to be an avid gamer as well. You're no longer into gaming these days, right? Because you don't have the time anymore, I presume.
I'm theoretically into them, but in terms of practicality, I just don't have the time anymore.
She showed us a picture of a guy who was on the verge of what she calls an epic win. She says that that is when you discover that you can do a lot more than you ever thought is possible, and you're shocked to see what you're capable of. And she says that this is why gamers should solve the world's problems. They should be able to do that because gamers, and probably most of us, think that they're a lot more capable in games than they are in real life. And she says to see this expression of being on the verge of an epic win is what we need to see on the faces of millions of problem solvers in the world. How do you feel about that? Can you say something about that?
I would love to see more of my colleagues, more scientists, more of the young scientists have that experience of an epic win. By her definition, certainly my career has been one of those where I take on more than I think I can handle, and I'm astonished at what I'm capable of. And I think that should be part of science training, is introducing students to the excitement of an epic win and the potential of an epic win. It's funny, all of my graduate students are gamers. They're avid gamers. And it seems that I always attract avid gamers to my laboratory. Not intentionally. It's not part of an interview process, but they are all very much into World of Warcraft, Halo, and they're constantly talking about it all the time and talking about their accomplishments. And I think that probably has something to do with the risks that they're willing to take in the lab and the things that they're willing to think about in their research.
You're also a very strong advocate of diversity. In a paper you wrote in the past, you said that if we don't take all the minorities into account into research, science is going to be doomed. Would you elaborate a little bit on that? I know that you're not just talking about ethnic diversity, you're also talking about people who come from less privileged backgrounds and so on. You see diversity as a very broad range. I've noticed that, and it's one of your passions, I would say.
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting. Being a scientist, you see a lot of people that are comfortable embracing diversity of discipline. They're very comfortable, geologists working with the biologist because they feel that biologist brings something new to their research. But when you ask them about the diversity of people that they work with, the types of students that they work with and their backgrounds, they don't see readily the impact that perspective will bring to their work. And so I always felt that it was my responsibility as someone who, grew up as a minority, who grew up as a woman in science, who understands the value of disciplinary diversity, to bring diversity of all perspectives into the sciences, because we are not going to be able to advance if we don't embrace all perspectives, both disciplinary and human.
Could you give some examples of how somebody from a different background, you for instance, you're half Native American, American Indian, how does your background give you a specific perspective on things that someone like I would not have, for instance?
In the Native tradition, particularly a lot of our religion is based on a holistic view of our planet and how everything that we do touches nature and that we have to be responsible. So when I look at research opportunities or I look at projects, I'm informed by my heritage and how I might approach a problem differently than, say, someone who doesn't come from a background.
Could you give me a very practical example of that? Like,
one that jumps to my head is actually from one of my undergraduate students years ago, who was African American. She was raised by, her grandparents were sharecroppers. She was very poor, first generation, low income African American woman who had been raised by her grandparents. And she came into the laboratory as a chemistry major, and she wanted to do a project. And in talking to her, she began talking about the fact that her grandfather used snuff, right, which is apparently a type of tobacco that's inhaled in the South. And she wanted to know if there was a particular linkage between snuff users and their total body burden of metals, because she knew that tobacco, since it grows in soil, will have a lot of metals. From that research, she finished her project. She looked at snuff chemistry and tried to assess the relationship between the metals in snuff to exposures of different metals and disease in the area. That work actually informed the work that I continued to do on tobacco smoke chemistry over the following years. I never would have been interested in the metal chemistry of a plant had I not had a student who wanted to bring her heritage into her research.
That's a great example, yes. Thank you for that. How many students do you have right now? What's going on in terms of research in your lab?
Right now I have 3 PhD students, and they are all focused on issues of global change, from 2 of them that are looking at the impact of ocean acidification on the biomineralization process, and then 1 that's looking at ocean acidification records in the Permian-Triassic extinction. Mm-hmm. I have 2 postdocs. 1 is working on medical geology-related issues, particularly in the Congo and volcanic eruption. Oh. The other is actually doing ecological modeling. So I'm not an ecologist, but she's taking a lot of our data and integrating it with ecological data and then developing models to forecast change in coastal environments. And then I have an undergraduate student who is working on oxygen isotope records of climate change in biominerals. That's about it.